Thank you. Thank you so much, Dennis. I think that throughout the entire couple of sessions coming up, you're going to hear this discussion, this dialogue between super local and global scale mapping. I should have started by saying that many of the people that you're going to hear from today are part of something called the Idea Maps Network. It's an informal group of people who might label themselves as different types of slum mappers. These include people from communities all the way up to UN Habitat. And so Dennis, myself, Ryan Engstrom, Monica Kufer, Peter Elias, Caroline Cabaria, some other voices that you'll hear today have all been part of this kind of brainstorming and kind of asking the question, can we make data that are locally relevant at scale globally? And so that's this endeavor that we're pursuing, and you're going to hear a bunch of different ways that we're thinking about it. I'm going to spend the next couple of slides talking about why this matters. Ultimately, the idea is to help improve the lives of people who live in poverty without services or infrastructure and dignity. The way that you do that is not necessarily by producing a data set, and it's not even by using a data set. The real way that that changes, the way that people's lives improve, is that they have some better kind of dialogue and trust with the decision makers around them. And so a key part of this endeavor is really thinking about how do we facilitate more trust and some basic levels of understanding at super local levels between city residents who live in deprived areas and the local governments and other power holders around them. How do we do that? Data might be one way, might be a vehicle for helping to build some trust and some kind of common understanding. Sometimes the data itself is informative and right, and it has some kind of insight that allows people to see things clearly in the same way. I think a lot of our experiences that you'll hear about today is actually this is the process of co-producing data, the process of getting to understand each other's realities, language, way of talking about things, and actually kind of doing something together is actually where a lot of that trust and understanding comes from, regardless of what the data looks like when it comes out the other end. Some of the principles in the Idea Maps network is that the process is just as important as the data itself, and probably more important. We really center process. And so here in this example, these are two real people in Nairobi. Mario sits with the city water department. Nisera sits with the community-based organization in Kibera, a very large informal settlement. And, these are people that know each other and have trust and understanding and can speak civilly in a group. But they exemplify types of people that often have trouble having a conversation together that is on the same page, right? Where there's trust and respect and understanding. And so there is a role oftentimes for people from academia or NGOs to help as a kind of mediator. And that is a role that some of the folks in our network, like Caroline, who's at a research NGO in Nairobi, this is a kind of function that she might play, and how a lot of the modeler and data people in this group have started to think about themselves as this kind of potential kind of bringing people around a proverbial or actual table. We've evolved as a group. A lot of co-learning has happened over the last couple of years. This is an approach or a process that we've really started to embrace and articulate out loud to each other, which I think has been really helpful for shifting entirely what we do and how we do it, and even what we're mapping. So I'm not sure how many people here have kind of organized some kind of global project before with multiple stakeholders and have tried to mobilize something, right? A lot of us are data people, and I'm going to point real quick to these wedges in this circle. So these wedges represent on the top our community stakeholders, on the right are decision makers at a local level. I'm going to call them city managers. On the bottom is actually just everyone else. It's UN Habitat, it's the National Statistics Organization, it's the International Relief Agency, it's all the academic teams from the local university to the global Ivy Leagues. On the left are us data people. We often sit in academia, we might sit in government or agencies like the bank, for example, but we are oftentimes the facilitators of we start this process. And so how many people said, okay, I really want to be inclusive and diverse in this process and hear the voices at the local level. So I'm going to call a big workshop, and I'm going to get a big table, and I'm going to put 20 to 40 people around it. They're going to be people from slum communities and the local government and the local university and the international university and all of the NGOs working in this space. And we're going to have a conversation. And that's how we're going to start this equitable process. That's where Idea Maps as a group of people really started our efforts. It's where a lot of projects who try to be inclusive and really kind of center communities, that's how we often start our process. That's actually starting down here in the bottom wedge. And the reason that it's actually not starting with communities is that when you start with that big table, people enter the room with very different language, understanding, and power differentials. And so if that conversation is being facilitated by someone like myself, usually someone not from the context in which we are doing maps, or even someone like Caroline, who might be from a more local context, it's still somebody who's been educated with certain language, has a geography degree or statistics degree, and is going to hear things through a filter, right? They might not share the same language with community members who talk about their experiences of poverty and not feeling dignity. They might not be able to kind of, the feedback from a community member will fall on deaf ears, perhaps, for the facilitator in the room. And what often has happened, and we've seen in some of these meetings, is that it's really quick to get shut down when somebody with less power in the room speaks up and says something that someone with power feels bristled by. And so you don't really actually have equity in terms of the input and voices in the room. And so what we've started working on in more recent Idea Maps projects is really this idea of grounding with communities, starting with things that are just building up trusting relationships with communities as the people on the left side doing data stuff, saying, hey, we've got some resources. We would love to support you in collecting some data that is a priority for you. And in the process, learn what language you're using to talk about the issues that matter to you, and start understanding the context in which you operate. And understand from the community's perspectives, who are those key players that hold power, that are shaping the outcomes of people in vulnerable situations. And then by the time that we're actually sitting around a big table, we have, as facilitators, a lot better sensitivity to some of the dynamics in the room. And there's a little bit more kind of ability to create a shared discussion. And the idea is that we iterate around, meaning that once we've had that joint discussion, we actually, as data people, go off and start prototyping. We start imagining what something could look like based on all of this feedback so far, and then we bring it straight back to communities and say, is this still grounded in reality? Is this still what we were talking about, a couple of weeks and months ago, and go around that circle again until we finally can have a data product that makes sense at a local level in a lot of different places, and that's where it starts to scale. By starting with communities and really understanding what are the priorities, we'll use the word priorities to mean needs, right? Needs is something that's kind of got a negative dependency kind of connotation. Let's just think of priorities. When we start with communities and we start to understand priorities around data, usually communities don't need a slum map. They know that they live in a slum, and that what they usually need are something related to neighborhood asset or deprivation maps, something around like the transportation network, the building structures and quality, water and sanitation, really important one, and under services, unavailability of services or quality of services. And what's interesting is when you actually start with when you go to city government departments and at the highest level, they might start by saying, yeah, we could use a slum map. But honestly, the way that anything changes in cities is through city departments. And so there's actually a really strong shared interest in just neighborhood level asset and deprivation maps by people who work in decision-making roles in government. It's really only us in these kind of academic, NGO, international agency roles that really are interested in these larger slum maps that are comparable across settings for things like SDG monitoring, which is super important. But it is kind of, it's a different kind of data need than what is needed at a local level. And this is where some of that kind of balance and tension and maybe the feedback loop, the kind of going up and down scales that Dennis was just talking about. So I am interested in kind of like what comes next for idea maps. Today, you're going to hear a whole bunch of projects that have taken place. There's probably been over a dozen projects that have kind of fit together under this large family tree of evolving projects that different people are taking in different directions, working in this space in coordination with each other. What we need to push for next, I'm calling idea maps at scale. It's really kind of helping people like Dennis at UN Habitat operationalize this vision for something that's global and coordinated and integrated. And the way I would describe it is that with communities and local city governments, we produce these kind of citywide neighborhood level maps of assets and deprivations, which are inherently valuable to the people that we need to routinely give feedback on them or validate them. Because these are dynamic settings. We really need there to be feedback and validation of these fine scale data sets. And the only way that's going to happen is if people have a need for them, a use for them. Since slum dwellers and city governments to some extent don't have a really strong use case for slum maps, we are probably not going to get them as regular users of that data. We could hire them, but that would be expensive and not very productive. If we could put something in front of people that they genuinely need for their own purposes, their own priorities, we also have an opportunity to get some feedback from them. So that's how I'm thinking about this, is really working on those asset and deprivation layers that are really relevant to people who have on the ground lived experience, who can help us validate this information in more real time. And then from that, you kind of have some base data, some building blocks to generate something like an SDG 11 indicator globally. But this is not realized. That's one of the reasons why I'm here and wanting to kind of frame some of this discussion, because that's just a vision at this point.